Trigger warning, this episode contains references to both drug and alcohol addiction. If you are experiencing any of these issues, contact your healthcare provider or go to drughelpline.org.
All right, quiet on the set.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone, to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign podcast. Steve, it is episode 97.
We are just on the border of 100.
We are on the border, and it's kind of remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it just seems to have gone so quickly.
I was saying to Lindsay the other day, I think besides my husband, you're the person I spend the most time with.
For sure,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, beyond even work husband, because
Yes.
work husband, you know that phrase, but no, we spend a lot of time together. Yeah.
It's a good thing we like each other.
It is. It really is. And I also want to just share, we just got some really exciting news about who the guest will be on our 100th episode.
Yes, we did, and it's a doozy.
It's a doozy. It's amazing, and we're just gonna let that just simmer, as they say, as Michael
tease.
Jackson said. Let it simmer. Let it simmer.
Good tease there.
Yeah. So.
Well, we have that to look forward to definitely as we celebrate 100 episodes.
Right.
My gosh.
I know. Crazy. Jinx, Yomiko. All right, but let's
We've been
dive.
spending way too much time together.
Yes. Let's change the tenor.
We're going to bring it down a little bit.
Yeah.
We are. What we're going to talk about today was suggested by one of our listeners,
Yes.
Peta Wilson, who's from Australia. And she wrote us a long time ago. And she was really intrigued by kind of a dark period of Hollywood. And it's something that I don't think people talk about a lot. But she wanted to know about the rampant drug use from old Hollywood and how it started and how it got so out of control and how the studios dealt with it or didn't deal with it.
Right, or
and
encouraged it.
Encouraged it, and the people that sort of were victims along the way. It's definitely a darker topic, but it's certainly worth looking at because the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
I think that's true in Hollywood with drug use. I mean, we still deal with a lot of abuse, alcohol and drugs in our industry.
Right.
And this is sort of looking back on maybe how it all started.
Let's start by talking about one of the first people that actually kind of famously had an issue with it and made some strides in terms of what happened to him changing some things in Hollywood.
It's matinee idol Wallace Reid. And a lot of you may not have heard of him because he had a short career, but he had a very bright, brilliant career for a moment. At the time, he had it all. He had good looks and he had talent, he had success, he had wealth. A little bit about him. He was born 1891 in St. Louis, Missouri. He made a name for himself in Hollywood beginning roughly around 1910, and he was this good-looking, athletic, charming guy, and that, of course, translated beautifully in Hollywood to a screen star.
Right.
He made hundreds of silent films during the 1920s, and one of them, he was really one of the most celebrated actors of the 20s, I would say. In fact, he earned the moniker the screen's most perfect lover. Well, you know, besides being the screen's most perfect lover,
Right.
he was also married to the beautiful screen star Dorothy Davenport, and they had 2 kids. He had appeared in so many movies, but it was when he took on the role of Jeff, the blacksmith, in director D.W. Griffith's epic and racist The Birth of a Nation in 1915, it really placed Reid on the map.
Right.
He got glowing reviews, and he was then signed to a contract by Jesse L. Lasky with famous players. Reid was now a bona fide star.
So he's successful, he's handsome, he's got a wife, he's got children.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? This all changes when Reid is cast in a film called The Valley of the Giants, 1919. The film was shot in remote parts of Oregon. En route to the location, and this is scary in and of
it's so
itself,
scary.
the train carrying the cast and crew derailed while crossing a bridge. So Wallace Reid gets a 3-inch gash on his scalp, and a piece of broken glass cuts his arm to the bone.
Ugh, wow.
Like I said, in this remote location, it took 12 hours before help could arrive. Not wanting to lose any time for production, of course, the producers had Reid see a doctor who gave him doses of morphine for his pain so he could continue with the film. So it was all about finishing this film, not caring about the actor.
Commerce, yeah.
Well, sadly, that was the start of his addiction to morphine and the beginning of his life swirling out of control.
And sadly, the studio did nothing to help Wallace Reid. In fact, seeing him as this money-making machine that he was, they continued to force him into this grind of cranking out many movies a year, a schedule and a pace that only worsened his addiction. And then when rumors started flying around that he was actually strung out on something, all of his employers did everything they could to stop those rumors. His wife really bore witness to this drug addiction he had, and she once said in an article, quote, "For no apparent accountable reason, he would become irritable, morose, strange, a complete metamorphosis of his former self. And besides his mood changes, he also started losing lots of weight, and he began drinking on top of that, which really made things worse with his drug use."
Well, in October of 1922, so this is just 3 years after that train accident, while filming Nobody's Money, he collapsed. Assistant director Henry Hathaway is quoted as saying, "He sort of fumbled about and bumped into a chair and then just sat down on the floor and started to cry. They put him in a chair and he just keeled over. They sent for an ambulance and sent him to the hospital." I mean, just that picture alone.
Oh, it's just harrowing.
He spent weeks in sanitariums, was subjected to all kinds of barbaric treatments because back then they really didn't know how to
no real
help at all
plan for people who struggled with addiction.
And I also read that his weight, you mentioned his weight loss, he at one point was like 180 pounds. He got down to about 130 pounds. Tragically, he was never able to beat his demons. He died on January 19th, 1923, and he was only 31 years old.
Well, his death really sent shockwaves through Hollywood and kind of throughout America. I mean, he was this good-looking, all-American leading man. How could he possibly have a problem with drugs?
Yes.
And it was the first time, I think, that the dirty little secret of drug use in Hollywood became public. And I think Hollywood's response to that is very interesting. We're going to get into that, too.
Yes.
And his wife, Dorothy Davenport, she was now his widow. She was deeply affected by his death, and she became advocating against morphine addiction. His story not only reflects the personal tragedies of individuals in the film industry, but also it marks this pivotal moment in the evolution of Hollywood's approach to moral and ethical standards in filmmaking.
And remember, this is before any unions were formed for protections.
There was nothing.
Yeah.
So later in 1923, Davenport produced and starred in the film Human Wreckage, which warned people about the dangers of drug addiction, somewhat to the Reid relatives' dismay, who thought that it would overshadow his success, which is so awful.
Right, yeah.
She wanted to lecture speaking out against the dangers of dope, and she attempted to open these specialized sanitariums to help people who struggled with addiction.
So you would think that with Reid's death, as you said, he's this star.
Matinee idol.
Yeah. And his wife, her advocacy, you would think that that would be a wake-up call to the Hollywood studios and the producers who often prescribed pain pills, amphetamines, and barbiturates to their stars to keep them going through the long, grueling days of movie making. However, the industry turned a blind eye as the drug use became even more rampant in Hollywood.
Simultaneously, the roaring 20s were just zooming around everybody. This was America's backlash against prohibition. It brought forth this boozy, fun-loving era, and this alcohol and the use of recreational drugs became, like cocaine and opium, became fashionable. They were part of this whole hedonistic lifestyle. However, in Hollywood, drugs became a common tool of the studio systems to keep exhausted actors working and impossible production schedules on track. It seemed that powerful studios controlled every aspect of a star's life, their appearance, who they dated, even what they weighed.
As I mentioned, no unions or labor laws to protect workers on movie sets back in the days, including the stars, even the people that were the big names. So work days were absolutely brutal. They worked 6 and sometimes 7 days a week. Time was money. So if a star were to become injured or sick or just exhausted from the fast-paced production schedule, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the studio would often provide the quick fix.
I can imagine what that was.
Yeah, that doesn't mean a day off. Major
doesn't
studios,
mean a spa.
Right, no spa days. Major studios kept doctors on payroll to keep the actors working, no matter the cost. And these doctors routinely handed out barbiturates to counter stimulant use and amphetamines to keep stars awake.
Little pep pills.
Yeah. So in the 1920s, amphetamines were also commonly used by just regular old doctors in the everyday world for raising blood pressure, enlarging the nasal passages, and stimulating the central nervous system. So part of this at this time is that in general, no one really knows the horrible effects of these kinds of, overuse.
Yeah, it was the early days of it. I think a lot of people had a lot of experience with what do you do to help. Another star who kind of fell victim to addiction was the silent screen sweetheart, ALMA RUBENS. Now, she was born in 1897 in San Francisco, and she made a name for herself in Hollywood. She was this natural beauty with talent, and it soon started paying off, and she was soon recognized as this rising star. After she appeared opposite Douglas Fairbanks Sr. in The Half-Breed in 1916, her star quickly rose. She also co-starred in several westerns with William S. Hart, and she signed with William Randolph Hearst's Cosmopolitan Productions in 1920, where she starred in the hit film Humoresque 1920 and a lot of other movies. But later, she signed with Fox, where she starred in films like East Lynne in 1925. Interesting little note there. She was married many times, and her third husband was matinee idol Ricardo Cortez.
Wow.
Little tidbit there.
Yeah. So after an undisclosed ailment, she is in the grip of a worsening drug addiction. A doctor from the studio prescribed morphine for her pain, and like Wallace Reid, she became addicted. She struggled to overcome her addiction, but of course we know how that goes when you don't have help and you don't have the structure and support that you need. The drug was too powerful. She spent time in sanitariums as well. She was eventually arrested for drug smuggling in 1931 in San Diego, and that of course created bad publicity, which took its toll, and her film work dried up. Her final role was playing Julie in the 1929 version of Showboat. She died at the age of 33 from pneumonia brought on by years of addiction. Now, the morphine brings down your immune system, so a couple of these folks that are famous have died from that,
like
from pneumonia.
Opportunistic infections that were caused by a lowered immune system.
Right.
Yeah. Because of this rampant addiction to cocaine that was occurring around this time, definitely the first decade of the first half of the 20th century, Congress actually passed the Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914, which regulated and taxed the production, importation, and distribution of opiates and coca products. The act required registration with the government for anyone involved in these activities, and it imposed special taxes on those who, quote, produced, imported, manufactured, compounded, dealt in, dispensed, sold, distributed, or gave away opium or coca leaves, their salts, derivatives, or preparations. Essentially, it was designed to control and restrict the availability of all these substances.
But I'm listening to that description. Who is going to say, yes, I'm going to register myself, I'm an opium dealer, and I'm selling cocaine, and I'm going to, that doesn't even make sense.
Which that just makes the underground drug world stronger.
And it did. The Hollywood elite, of course, still had access to these drugs through studio doctors and dentists.
Yes, dentists. I read that a lot of people would get their drugs from their dentist back then, which is interesting.
There were even criminal syndicates who are now infiltrating the Hollywood scene because they're figuring we can make some money off of this. Often Hollywood studios even had a name for these doctors, these pill-pushing doctors. They would call them Mr. Fix-It or Captain Spaulding for their ability to keep their actors working. A common trend was to give an exhausted star amphetamines during the day, keep them alert, keep them working, then to give them barbiturates at night to knock them out, and then morphine and other painkillers to deal with any injuries they had or any pain.
Looking back on it, I think the early Hollywood drug narrative, it's not just a collection of tragic stories, it's really a cautionary tale about the costs of unchecked power and unbridled ambition, especially with the studio system. Even in the 1920s, morphine or cocaine might be legally prescribed for pain, making early addiction socially acceptable. But the line between medical treatment and supply-driven exploitation really blurred quickly, especially when movie revenue came first. And it did.
Well, and the Hays Code is going to be adopted in just a little bit here in 1934, and we're going to see how that affects or doesn't affect the drug use. But before we get into that, let's share this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And our pop quiz question this week, keeping with the drug use theme that we're working with here is Joanna Moore was a very charismatic, lovely actress from the 1960s who also suffered from drug abuse and drug use. However, she was able to overcome her addiction with the help of her famous daughter. Who was her daughter?
We'll be right back with that answer and more about drug abuse in Old Hollywood after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. There are a few different ideas as to where the name Hollywood came from. Some sources say the name comes from an estate in Illinois. Others claim that the name comes from the words hauling wood. Either way, the name stuck, but there's a more popular story as to how it got its name. In the late 1880s, a man named Harvey Henderson Wilcox and his wife Daida bought 120 acres of land west of Los Angeles. After hearing a stranger on a train mention the Dutch word Hollywood, Daida was inspired to name their property Hollywood. Later on, the couple created a subdivision with the same name. The film industry didn't even exist in the region until about 20 years later. But when it took root, the name Hollywood was firmly established. Imagine if your ancestors had bought even 1 acre back in 1887, huh? And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. But before we go further into today's episode, I wanted to give a shout out to our listener of the week. And of course, since this entire episode was inspired by our listener from down under, Peta Wilson. So Peta, thank you for this recommendation. It's been a really interesting journey doing research on this, and we really appreciate your support, and we really appreciate the suggestion.
Thanks, Peta. So when we left off before the break, we were talking about the Hays Code being adopted in 1934. One of the things that was a no-no after that was instilled is that you couldn't show drug use on screen. But it didn't do anything. Yeah, it didn't do anything off screen, right?
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah.
Not at all. This drug abuse was often combined with alcohol abuse, which they tend to go hand in hand. And this led to many stars becoming hopeless alcoholics on top of the drug use. And this was the fate of screen star Mary Pickford's actor brother, Jack Pickford. After years of alcohol abuse, his body finally gave up on January the 3rd, 1933, when he was only 36 years old. The official cause of his death was listed as progressive multiple neuritis, which attacks all the nerve centers. This was brought on, of course, by his abuse of alcohol.
Another tragic story of drug abuse and addiction during this time involved silent screen actress Juanita Hansen. This Iowa-born beauty made a splash in Hollywood, appearing in silent films. She became one of the famous Senate bathing beauties and appeared in a variety of movie serials like The Brass Bullet in 1918, an 18-episode serial at Universal. However, she soon began using recreational drugs, and this affected her work. Because of her unreliability, her offers to work began to dry up. She tried to clean up her act. She spent time in several sanitariums for treatment to break free of this stronghold that drugs had on her. After a lengthy stay at the Oakland Sanitarium, she even wrote about her addiction in a 1923 nationally syndicated account of her addiction. In the article, she credited Dr. John Baker at the sanitarium with helping her get clean. However, she soon slid back into her dangerous ways and was back in the throes of addiction. She hit rock bottom when she tried to kill herself in the early 1930s. This proved to be a wake-up call, giving her the strength to kick the habit for good. And in 1934, she began to travel the country lecturing on the dangers of drugs. In 1938, she wrote the book The Conspiracy of Silence, arguing that drug addicts should be sent to specialized medical institutions for treatment instead of being sent to prison. This is a big issue.
That's so interesting. That was such the forefront of this movement.
Yes, and it still is.
Yeah,
it's still an issue today.
Argue about this issue.
She also started her own charity, the Juanita Hansen Foundation, to help raise awareness about drug abuse. Just a side note, I would love to know in the early 20s and 30s when they went to a sanitarium and they had, quote, treatments. I read that some people did actually talk about things like in the 12-step programs of today.
Like
you get together
situation.
in therapy. But in terms of other things that they did, clearly none of it was working.
What was the treatment actually like?
Right.
I know I'd be curious too what that was. During this time, sadly, there were so many other stars who suffered from the effects of alcohol and drug abuse. Silent star Mabel Normand, who we all know and love, she reportedly struggled with a cocaine addiction, and she was dead at 36. Then there was stage and screen star Jean Eagles, who developed an addiction to heroin, and she died at just 39. Actress Mary Nolan, who was ostracized in Hollywood for a scandalous affair with comedian Frank Tinney, she became addicted to cocaine, and she died from a seconal overdose in 1948 at the age of 45. Then there was Lupe Velez, was known as the Mexican Spitfire. Her addiction to seconal and booze led to her infamous suicide in 1944 at the age of 36. And there was even Dracula star Bela Lugosi. He suffered a morphine addiction that haunted him for years. And even good old Lionel Barrymore reportedly battled a morphine addiction after he took the drug to help with his arthritis.
Well, over at MGM, and I'm sure people who are listening have been waiting for this topic to come up, right?
The poster child for drug abuse, perhaps?
Yes. The studio bosses were plying teen stars Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland full of pep pills to
Sounds so pleasant.
Yeah, pep pills to stay on their feet during grueling shoots. Now, reflecting back, Garland told her biographer Paul Donnelly, quote, "They'd give me and Mickey Rooney pills to keep us on our feet long after we were exhausted. Then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us out with sleeping pills. Then after 4 hours, they'd wake us up and give us the pep pills again so we could work 72 hours in a row. Half of the time we were hanging from the ceiling, but it was a way of life for us."
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's just horrible. And then in addition, as we've talked about in previous episodes on The Wizard of Oz, Garland was given harmful diet pills to knock off some of her natural baby fat. So by the age of 17, Judy Garland was hooked, and it led to a life of addiction that ultimately killed her.
Oh, just one of the biggest tragedies in all of Hollywood.
Truly.
Yeah. Interesting. When Debbie Reynolds was cast as the female lead in Singin' in the Rain many years later, 1952, she began this grueling rehearsal schedule. That, coupled with the pressure of playing the female lead, caused her health to deteriorate a little bit. Well, Reynolds' doctor told her to take a week off of work. However, MGM studio chief Arthur Freed told her to go to the doctor for vitamin shots. Years later, Reynolds wrote in her autobiography that she refused to take the studio-ordered vitamin shots to help with her exhaustion. She didn't trust the shots, and she really feared that this was how Judy Garland initially got hooked. So
good on her.
Smart girl, Debbie Reynolds.
And it wasn't just Hollywood actors who fell prey to the dangers of drugs. Actress Evelyn Keyes, who played Scarlett O'Hara's younger sister in Gone with the Wind, 1939, she wrote about seeing producer David O. Selznick, quote, crushing up Benzedrine and licking the pieces from the palm of his hand, a grain at a time, on set.
Wow.
Because of the long hours of trying to produce this film and needing to be sharp and needing to be awake.
Stay awake and stay alert.
Yeah.
Also on the rise in Hollywood was the use of cannabis. It became such a problem that a church group financed a film that they hoped would be a cautionary tale against the use of marijuana. It was to be called Tell Your Children. Good title.
Right.
However, when producer Dwayne Esper got involved, he had other plans. He made the film this campy exploitation film that turned out unintentionally funny, and it became a cult classic. And of course, I'm talking about Reefer Madness, 1936, and I seriously doubt that this film kept anybody from experimenting with weed.
Yeah, very doubtful.
Yeah, if you've seen it, you'll know.
After World War II, amphetamines grew in popularity due to the widespread use and abuse by the soldiers during the war. This is crazy to me. So soldiers were widely distributed amphetamines to combat fatigue and improve both mood and endurance. I mean, I just think about that.
They didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I really think they just didn't know any better.
And then after the war, doctors began to prescribe amphetamines to fight depression. So the use of amphetamines was helped throughout the studio system by that usage during World War II.
By the 1950s, the studios were still up to their old tricks by providing a medicine cabinet full of options to their stars who needed a little pep or had pain or just needed to sleep. Marilyn Monroe's struggles with drugs and alcohol are obviously well documented, and suffering from depression, insomnia, and anxiety, she came to rely on pharmaceuticals to make it through the day. 20th Century Fox, her home studio, aided and abetted in her addiction for sure. sure. Former Fox studio doctor Lee Siegel told Marilyn's biographer Anthony Summers, quote, "In those days, pills were seen as another tool to keep stars working. The doctors were caught in the middle. If one doctor would not prescribe, there was always another who would. Everyone was using pills." And of course, Marilyn Monroe died on August the 4th, 1962 of a lethal combination of barbiturates and alcohol. Her death was ruled a suicide, but those close to her feel it was accidental.
Another bright light that was extinguished due to addiction was that of the beautiful Dorothy Dandridge. After a promising career that included being the first black woman to be Oscar nominated in the Best Actress category for Carmen Jones in 1954, her life and career took a nosedive. Her career opportunities were limited, of course, by racism, which caused major financial struggles. She also experienced disastrous love affairs with abusive men who used her. She turned to alcohol and antidepressants to cope, and this led to her fatal overdose on September 8th, 1965. She was only 42. Can you imagine what she could have done if she had lived?
What we've missed out on.
Yeah.
Well, the 1960s, it was a full-fledged epidemic with so-called rainbow diet pills. And these were actually a potent cocktail of sedatives and stimulants commonly prescribed by doctors. It was during this period that all the stay-at-home moms were given these highly addictive pills to feel better. And now the 1960s also became a time when stars like Cary Grant began experimenting with the medicinal uses of psychedelic drugs like LSD.
In 1970, amphetamine use was dramatically curtailed by the Controlled Substances Act. This act acknowledged that amphetamines were dangerous and addictive, which is good.
That's a start.
That's a start.
1970.
But by then, Hollywood had moved on to other stimulants, and that studio system that had been in place giving actors drugs to keep them going was starting to break down.
Yeah. And by the 80s, of course, cocaine returned in a big way as a preferred drug of choice in Hollywood. By the late 90s, party drugs were all the rage, with the rising use of acid and shrooms and Molly and other psychedelics. So many talented people lost their lives to drugs during this period. I think about River Phoenix and Heath Ledger and Whitney Houston and Chris Farley, even Anna Nicole Smith. It continues to this day.
The history of drug use in Hollywood is not one of casual misbehavior. It's a narrative of institutional design rooted in exploitation, control, and coerced dependency. From the morphine-fed tragedy that we started with in this episode of Wallace Reid to Judy Garland's lifelong addiction and Marilyn Monroe's fatal overdose, a pattern is emerging.
The industry, they basically traded human health for studio production, which is just horrible. I mean, they reveal how organizations that prioritize profit over people create cycles of addiction that transcend generations. In remembering these star-crossed figures, we have to ask harder questions about responsibility and reform and empathy, both then and now. And it makes you wonder if things might have been different had the Hollywood establishment reacted differently and tried to become proactive in curbing drug abuse after the shocking death of Wallace Reid. Then perhaps his death would not have been in vain.
Amen to that, my friend.
Well, that's a feel-good show, huh?
Yeah, that really is. But it's important. And
yeah.
You know,
it's part of the fabric of Hollywood, and it happened, and we should learn from it, hopefully.
And it's still happening today.
Still happening, yep.
Yeah. Well, let's share with our listeners the answer to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the question was, of course, another actress who had an issue with drugs was Joanna Moore. However, she did become clean with the help of her famous daughter. Who was her daughter?
That would be Tatum O'Neal.
It would be.
She was a young actress at the time in the 70s, and she helped her mother financially.
Yes. Joanna Moore was married to Ryan O'Neal from 63 to 67. She had Tatum and her brother, and actually Tatum was very instrumental in helping her get her life together.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening and being with us today. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast. And hey, follow us on social media, because we're going to be teasing our 100th episode.
It's good.
It's good. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. And if you watch the podcast on YouTube, please like and subscribe.
And keep those emails coming. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode. and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap.
In fact, he earned the moniker the screen's most perfect lover.
Oh, I thought that was Lindsay.
Oh. That's great.
Thank you, Nan.